Good morning, everyone. There we go. It, as always, is such a joy to welcome you to Newman Lumen on this Thursday morning. For those of you I don't have the pleasure of knowing, my name is Reverend Julie Tonneson, and I serve as one of the chaplains here at the Truett Center. You'll notice that our setup in the space today is slightly different than other weeks, and that is because today is Trans Day of Remembrance, and we're really honored to be partnering with the Gender and LGBTQIA Center for this special Newman Lumen this morning. So please help me, first of all, to welcome Janita Smith, who's a student staff member from the Gender and LGBTQIA Center, who's going to share a little bit about Trans Day of Remembrance and that observance with us, and also share some poetry by a trans artist with us as well.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Hello, like it was stated, I'm Janita Smith. I currently work in the GOC as a student manager within our QT POC initiative, and I'm one of your speakers for Newman Lumen. And today we gather for Transgender Day of Remembrance and Resilience, an annual moment of reflection, solidarity, and commitment. Each year, November 20th, communities around the world pause to honor the lives of transgender and gender-diverse people who've been taken by anti-trans violence. TDOR began in 1999, founded by advocate Gwendolyn Ann Smith after the murder of Rita Hester, a Black transgender woman whose death and silence surrounding it revealed the depth of discrimination facing the trans community. What began as a small vigil has grown to a global movement of remembrance and resistance. As we see the names of those we've lost, we recognize that they were more than statistics. They were people with dreams, with families, with talents, and with futures that should have been protected. Their lives remind us of the work that remains, to challenge prejudice, to create safety, and to uplift trans voices in every space we occupy. But TDOR is not only a moment of mourning, it is also a call to action. It asks each of us to stand firmly against transphobia, to support trans people in our communities, and to build a world where every person can live authentically and without fear. Today we remember, we grieve, and we recommit ourselves to justice. May the memory of those we honor lead us forward with courage, compassion, and unwavering resolve. Thank you. And now I'll be reading a poem. So it's called Tone It Down by Aduni. But yes, just the exact way that you say to remind us of outdoing the box, an opposing call to order, reminding us that we might just be doing too much. After all, we pay dues with our heads buried under the waters, and dreams dying in thoughts. Yet, we advise to tone it down, denying ourselves of existing at their comfort, while we are made aliens at our birthplace, homes, and even to ourselves. They say the more the normality, the better the acceptance. We have been taught to hate who we are, be afraid of what we become, and beat down at anything that takes our form. They say you do not have to be out and loud, but you, while you stay flourishing in the regretful corner of your heart. Your freedom is to imposing restricting opinions on our expression of self. For what we love, who we are, brings us together, and so the same. The same is that joy to exist differently and free, how so sweet to consider our safety, but it's not a position to apologize when they are not close to comfort with our lives. And thank you.
Janita, thank you so much for setting the stage for us this morning and helping us to center ourselves on the importance of this day. We are pleased to be hearing from Dr. Lynn Huber, Professor of Religious Studies, this morning. She teaches courses on the Bible and early Christian literature, writes about the book of Revelation, and studies LGBTQIA two-spirit biblical interpretation. I know I've had the opportunity to learn so much from her, and I'm really grateful for your words this morning. So thank you, Dr. Huber, for being here.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And I'm really honored to have this opportunity to speak today. And I normally try to avoid speaking in contexts like this, but this is an important day. And so I'm honored to be here to do it. And I do so as a queer person who has chosen family and friends who are trans and gender nonconforming. And I also do this as someone who's lost a person I cared about deeply to transphobia. So this is why I asked for tissues. And so I do this with those people in mind. So my words today reflect my identity as a scholar of the Bible, which is a collection of text with an outsized role in creating the gender binary, with stories that make sex and gender seem rigid and natural. It includes texts used to threaten those who don't conform to cisgender expectations and heteronormativity. In fact, the specific text I study, the book of Revelation, is one of the most frequently leveraged for hate, with its depictions of judgment and eternal damnation. At the same time, as a Revelation scholar, I work alongside trans colleagues and other queer biblical scholars to destabilize cis and heteronormative readings of the Bible and of Revelation. I do this work because the Bible remains authoritative in certain communities and continues to be meaningful for many people, including some, not all, obviously, and understandably, but some queer and trans folks. The Bible has shaped the cultures in which many of us try to live and thrive, so they're just as much ours as theirs. And theirs, I mean those who want us to go back into hiding, to tone it down, or to unalive ourselves. Folks harmed by these writings and the structures they've created deserve to have them reread in ways that are life-affirming. So let's go. So first, a little background. Revelation is a book that was written during the 1st century CE by a person named John who had a visionary experience that may or may not have been drug-induced. Really, yeah, and we don't know. John's vision presents a sustained critique of imperial systems that revel in wealth and luxury and that employ violence and toxic masculinity to control and exploit. Sound familiar? John accuses these political and social powers of embodying evil, which is characterized as the beast. This book is far, far, far from perfect, and it's far from a perfect critique of imperialism. And John replicates the misogyny of antiquity, but we can still read it queerly and with what biblical scholar Joe Henderson Marigold calls cis-suspicion. So the main part of the book begins with John entering the heavenly throne room, dragging the book's audience along. Entering through heaven's door, John experiences a colorful, loud, and movement-filled place, kind of like a gay club from the 1980s. Songs fill the air. Elders repeatedly throw their tiaras on the ground, and some furry-looking folks wave their wings, which look like they've been covered in sparkly eyes. It's totally wild. John's attention, though, is drawn to a divine figure on the throne, the center of everyone's attention. The divine figure isn't really depicted as a human or in gender form at all. Instead, John tells the audience that the divine looks like gemstones and that a rainbow surrounds the throne. I mean, how queer is that? So despite all this, John becomes upset when seeing that the one on the throne holds a sealed book that no one can open. One of the queer elders in the room comes up and comforts John, explaining that a Messiah, a kingly figure who is compared to a lion, will open the book. The elder also mentions that this Messiah will conquer, or to make it a bit more queer, this Messiah slays. When John turns to set eyes on this butch king, the audience sees along with the prophet that the lion is a very femme lamb. The image in John's depiction is John's depiction of Jesus Christ, whom Christians confess as one crucified, buried, resurrected, and ascended. Thus, John describes the lamb as slaughtered, but still standing. The image actually brings together in one entity ancient notions of masculinity and femininity, conquering and being conquered, one who could penetrate and one who could be penetrated. In ancient Roman thinking, this vision is gendered, and it's gender queer. The lamb, from a modern perspective, might be read as trans and can be read as trans, one who transitions from male to female, and who still bears the sign of her transition. In this vein, trans-biblical scholar and a friend of mine, Jada Calway, describes her own transition in terms of dying and rising, or resurrection. She says of herself, "I was sown a boy, but I am rising a woman. I was assigned male, but I'm claiming my femaleness," end quote. Moreover, not only does the Lamb appear in the throne room, but she also finds her way onto the heavenly throne, which she shares with the divine. Upon seeing this, everyone in the heavenly throne room, on the earth, in the sea, and literally everywhere, I think the text even mentions like the beings that are in the bellies of the beings in the sea, they offer her praise and glory. They give the Lamb her flowers and more. The idea that the divine shares power or even divinity with a trans lamb is breathtaking. It's breathtaking not because it should be, but because of what we've been taught and what we've been told. It's not that trans lives need this kind of affirmation. They don't. Trans lives matter, full stop. However, I think the text calls readers, and especially trans ally readers, to recognize a divine quality of living into and creating oneself, which is often at the heart of being trans. Divinity is often associated with an ability to create, such as the case in Revelation, when those around the throne proclaim of the divine, quote, "For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created," end quote. The person who resists the predetermined ideas of sex and gender imposed on them to instead embrace and create their identity as they see, understand, and feel it is truly a creator. They may bear the scars of their experience, but they stand like the Lamb, whether that's literally or metaphorically. This is the one who conquers, as the text suggests. This, the one who creates themselves, is the one who slays. But the story of Revelation doesn't end with the Lamb. The genderqueer trans Lamb provides a model for others as the book encourages audience members to follow the Lamb wherever she goes. The book even describes two unnamed witnesses who do just that. The witnesses testify, presumably about the divinity of the trans Lamb. They do it 1,260 days. Let's not get into that number, it's a little specific. But they are given incredible powers, including the power to turn water into blood and prevent rain from falling. As a horror fan, those are really exciting ideas to me. But they also are able to pour out fire with their mouths. So in spite of their power, or perhaps because of it, they're actually killed by the beast, the manifestation of evil and imperial systems of oppression. And the people who worship this beast gloat over their deaths. In fact, the witnesses are left dead in the streets, their bodies dishonored. The lack of empathy mirrors the hatred we see aimed at trans people today, and the hatred we see aimed today around us at immigrants as well. Yet following the model of the Lamb, quote, "After the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them," the witnesses, "and they stood on their feet," end quote. Even though it may seem like the witnesses were defeated by empire and hate, they are empowered by the divine spirit within them, and they stand on their own volition. So historically, interpreters of Revelation have aligned the witnesses with biblical prophets and religious figures like Elijah and Enoch. The fact that they are unnamed, however, invites connections to others who proclaim and embody God's work in the world and God's identity in the world. In queer and trans tradition, when we think of two witnesses, the activists Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera automatically come to mind. Johnson, a Black trans woman, and Rivera, a Puerto Rican trans woman. As those of us gathered here today know, both were present and considered part of the front line during the Stonewall Uprising of 1969, even if their precise involvement is not entirely clear. That's actually kind of akin to the testimony of the two witnesses in Revelation, since we never learn exactly what they say. Still, their presence witnesses to their undeniable role in the fight for trans and queer rights and the leadership of trans people of color in the fight for trans and queer rights. The lives and death of Johnson and Rivera might not exactly match the description of Revelation's witnesses, but they did experience the blows of the beast. Both modern witnesses endured abuse at early ages because of gender expression and dealt with various forms of discrimination and trauma throughout their adult lives. Still, both were noted activists and leaders in the queer community. Together, they founded STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, an early organization supporting trans folk in NYC. It's fair to say that fire poured out of their mouths when they witnessed. The fire they brought, although wasn't just aimed at the straight, white establishment, often imagined as the primary foe of the queer movement. Much of their criticism was directed at white gays and lesbians, who were quick to forget trans folk and to forget Black and brown queer and trans people when white queers were granted some measure of respect. In an interview from 1972, Johnson decried the failure of the gay brothers to welcome transgender folks. Despite this, Johnson still claimed that her goal was liberation for all in the queer community, even if it required picking up a gun and starting a revolution. This language, I think, underscores the performative nature of gender. Johnson could perform masculinity when needed. The cause of Johnson's death remains a mystery to this day. She died in 1992. Close friends and fellow transgender activists challenged the initial ruling that Johnson died by suicide, recognizing that the violence faced by sex workers and Black trans women likely played a role. The case, which remains unsolved, was ignored until 2012 when the New York Police Department agreed to revisit it due to pressure from Johnson's trans and queer community members. Furthermore, it took the New York Times over 25 years to publish a full-length obituary for Johnson, a prominent NYC citizen. The unsolved status of her murder, the delayed recognition of her tragic death in the paper of record, New York Times reporting on trans issues is horrific. The erasure of her and Rivera from National Parks Stonewall website underscores the need for us to continue fighting the beast. In the end, the witnesses of Revelation are resurrected and taken into heaven by God, paralleling the resurrection and ascension of Christ. In recent years, the trans and queer community has in many ways resurrected the witness of Johnson and Rivera. For instance, their names, stories, and testimonies are often shared at moments like this, when we pause to remember those who we have lost to transphobia. But I want to encourage all to continue resurrecting their stories and the stories of so many other trans witnesses, those who surround us. By saying their names, we help keep them alive. And by saying their names, we remind ourselves, including trans allies, of the need to continue fighting against transphobia. Finally, I hope we can remember that there is something powerful and godlike in being trans and gender nonconforming. If you are an ally, this is especially important to remember and to remind your friends, that's your trans friends and family. Now, I just made that up. So friends, I'm gonna say that now forever. But remind your friends and family that that is the case. And if you are trans, hear that. You are worthy, you are good, you are totally divine. Thank you.